Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So, as you can tell from the title and the thumbnail, this is the last installment to my What BookTok Doesn't Show miniseries, 3-episode miniseries. And I realized last week at the end of the books one, I realized I misspoke. I'm only going to be talking about like 5 genres, book styles that I feel like BookTok doesn't show that you should try out. And one of them, well, 2 of them I've kind of lumped together a little bit, but I will give book recommendations for both of them separately. But I did lump them together because a lot of for those books, a lot of them can fit under genres and a lot of like different genres. So I don't think I have a couple manga tags coming out in July. I have 2 coming out in July, so I'm going to be talking a lot about manga next month. So at least in terms of this video, I know last week I gave like 4 different manga recs, and then a manhwa, and then some of those recs, 2 of them will overlap with this video, and then maybe I should do a different one. One moment. Okay, I've switched it up a little bit. I'll just need to edit the description before I upload this to YouTube. But so I've changed like the 2 of the prompts, or 2 of the answers for 2 of the genres. But the reason why I kind of put them together, like I was saying, is because a lot of them can fit under various different genres. But again, I am giving 2 different recommendations for those 2. So you can look down in the description to see what I've recommended. I would appreciate it if you could watch this fully, like and give a like and give a comment, because that really helps out the channel. And like I mentioned last week, it's something I've been doing in my recent videos. Hopefully it'll probably start being a little bit more consistent mid-August roughly. But by the end of the video, I ask a question in relation to the video. So if you could watch through the end and then answer that question, that would be greatly appreciated. But like I mentioned last week, if you want to answer any questions from previous videos, comment down below and go ahead and answer those as well. So again, any and all engagement is welcome. So with all of that said, let's get into this book tag. Or it's not a book tag, crap. Let's get into this book recommendations video. So first up, I'm going to go through the genres, and then I'm going to go through the book recommendations, just to make it like a little bit more distinct. And for the book recommendations, they're in order of how I will list the genres, or of how I will go through the genres. But when I give the book recommendations, I will mention which genre it is, or which book style it is a recommendation for. So the first recommendation is manga and manhwa, and this is where initially I did have some overlap, but I did change it up. I feel like people are I feel like if you're in certain circles of social media and in certain social media niches, then you do see more people talking about manga, but it's not necessarily on BookTok. And that's something, it's not necessarily in bookish social media spaces. I know of at least 1, maybe 2 creators on BookTube who talk about manga and manhwa, but it's a very small percentage of the bookish social media spaces. So that's what and like I said, this is the one where it's like they can fit under so many different genres and so many different story plot points can line up with story plot points, story tropes that you like. So this would be like really good, and it'll naturally help diversify your reading, because most manhwa, manga, dame, most of it is by a non-white, non-Eurocentric author. Most of it, what classifies manga is that usually it's a Japanese author, and then manhwa, depending on the spelling, is either going to be Chinese or Korean. And dame is kind of like a subset genre for manga and manhwa. It's like a boys love gay, so it's that kind of a thing where it'll naturally help diversify your reading just by picking up like a manga. And it's not necessarily something you have to do all the time, but like manga are naturally really short. And it is something where it's like it does take a little bit of time getting used to. You can see the first recommendation, but it does take some time getting used to reading this side to this side. But like at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal, and the pictures really help it along. So that's why it's like, or the artwork really help it along. So that's why it's like, oh, this is novels. Okay, this is also based off of novels. Anyway, so it's like it'll naturally help diversify your reading. And then if you look at like manhwa, it's a little bit thicker. It's like a normal novel, and this can kind of help be your introduction to manga and manhwa, and both spellings, manhua and manhwa. So like it'll be like manhwa can be a natural stepping stone to get into manga and to graphic novels, because a lot of it is very similar beat points. And then that's like the only book style I want to recommend, because like I do see a lot more book styles being recommended on bookish social media spaces, which is great. So that's the only one that I'm going to be recommending for book style. As for genres, and I did put them together because, like I mentioned, it's a lot of similar beat points, and usually it's the eastern part of the world, and so like Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Taiwanese, that part of the world. And I would highly recommend, like, when you're looking into them, like, kind of see where the author or authors are from, just because then it gives you a little bit more cultural context for certain things. And most manhwa and dame, most will have a little section at the end. Most of the ones that I've like quickly looked through have a little section at the end called Character and Name Guide or something like that. And then it gives you like the birth names, courtesy names, gives you stuff about their life, and then let's see what else is here. So like locations. It'll give you like locations, and it'll give you the kanji if it's Japanese, or the Chinese characters. I'm blanking on what those are called. And it'll give you like some more context. So it's like, if you're getting like a manga or a manhwa, like that will give you a little bit more context. So that aside, a lot of these, like I said, can fit under different genres. So that's why I put them together, as well as having similar beat points. But getting back to genre recommendations, so dual timeline historical fiction. I forgot to grab a book for that. Let me go grab that real quick. Okay, I got my dual timeline historical fiction, which is right before. Okay. Just making sure I'm putting it in the right spot in my book stack. So, dual timeline historical fiction. I know last week I talked about maybe including World War II historical fiction as a genre recommendation, but when I was going through stuff and going through like the books I would want to recommend and genres I would want to recommend, I kind of decided against that one because, like I mentioned last week, it is a very heavily flooded part of the historical fiction genre. It is a very flooded subset. Again, like I said not last week, it is not bad that we have so much World War II historical fiction. It's a good thing, especially now. However, like I mentioned last week, we do need some diversity, which within the historical fiction genre. So there are two other genres that I mentioned in this video that could count under the historical fiction umbrella, but they are distinct genres in their own right as well. So I decided to steer clear of World War II historical fiction, but the first genre that I'm going to recommend, like I said, is the dual timeline historical fiction, because I understand why people might not like it as much, because it can be confusing who's who. However, if it's done right, I do think it can be very well done, and thankfully the book, I'm going to recommend the book that got me back into reading fiction and was a dual timeline. This author, I mentioned her last week as well. This author, she does a really good job at doing dual timelines. Her last book wasn't a dual timeline, which was a nice little refresher, but she does so well at dual timelines, and she does even though a lot of the characters are part of the same family or somehow connected, she does give them distinct enough voices. So if dual timeline historical fiction is done well, it is done well, and I think it's really good to talk about, because you get multiple perspectives from different people about the same sequence of events, or a similar sequence of events. So that's why I think it's really good to read dual timeline, and that's why, like I've said, if it's done well, then it's really good. So dual timeline historical fiction. The next one I would want to recommend is historical fantasy. Now, I feel like this is one that people kind of brush over a little bit, because oftentimes it's just lumped under fantasy. But if you think of Lord of the Rings would technically be considered historical fantasy, because that's how J.R. Tolkien presented it. Lord of the Rings, historical fantasy, the Silmarillion, a lot of the works related to Middle Earth. So the Silmarillion, I'm looking at somewhere right on my desk here. Unfinished Tales, The Fall of Numenor, a lot of those could also be considered historical fantasy, because even though it's not necessarily accurate historical places or events, even though it's fictionalized historical places, events, and people, it's presented in a historical way. And the reason why I say this is because of the prologue in the Fellowship of the Ring. Is it the prologue? I have it right here. The prologue. In the prologue, it talks about it. So it's and that's the way it phrases it too. So, historical fantasy, Lord of the Rings. If you like Lord of the Rings, if you try to look into some other historical fantasy, whether it's based in real life or not, it could be a good genre. I'm trying to think of some other historical fantasy that I'm not recommending in this video. I feel like Emily McIntyre's Never After novels could sort of be considered historical fantasy. Sort of dependent on how modern you think they are. I'm not those are more like fantasy romance and dark romance. So that's why it's they could be considered historical fantasy, but very, very loosely. Let's see, what else could be historical fantasy? And again, a lot of the genres will overlap, which is why it's maybe not. Let's see. What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez could be historical fantasy to an extent. There's a lot. And then if you look at some of the Disney Twisted Tales, specifically When You Wish Upon a Star by Elizabeth Lim, Almost There by Farrar O'Shawn, Fate Be Changed by Farrar O'Shawn, those could all be considered historical fantasy as well. So it's it is a really diverse genre. It is really good genre, and it can be done really well, again, if done right. So a lot of these really well if done right. So I'm going to try to stop saying that. The next genre is mythological fiction. This is one that could fit under the historical fiction genre, umbrella genre, just because a lot of the mythological retellings, I just put it as mythological fiction here just because, just like, I don't know, it sounded like a little bit fancier than mythological retelling. I will usually say mythological retelling. For the sake of this video though, like, mythological fiction sounded fancier. But because a lot of mythological retellings, mythological fiction, are about stories, are about myths that happened in the past, it is a form of fiction and historical fiction. So that's why I personally kind of include it in that umbrella genre of historical fiction. But I do think it's its own distinct fiction, and I think people do talk about mythological fiction and not a lot. But I think I have two, one of which is a subsection of mythological fiction that people do talk about, but the one book that I chose isn't talked about as much. Excuse me. And then the other book, like, the reason why I included it, even though it is relatively popular, is partly to be like, hey, this is a book you can read if you like that. But it's to kind of like showcase some other books within that genre, to be like, hey, it's not like, as much as I love like the Greco-Roman retellings, it's like, hey, there's more to mythology than just the Greco-Roman pantheon and mythology. So, and then the very last one that I'm going to recommend is high fantasy. Now, I feel like this is kind of like a tricky subject because there are certain books within high fantasy. Lord of the Rings. Why was I blanking? The Game of Thrones series, like A Song of Fire and Ice, I think. Game of Thrones series. I think, like, Patrick Rothfuss, and then Brandon Sanderson. I think there are certain individual books or book series and or authors who are popular, but like, we could give a little bit more love to the historical fantasy, not the historical fantasy, the high fantasy genre, because again, it can include a lot, and there are some things where it's like, typically a book can be like, is more classed as this, but it can technically also be high fantasy. But I do have two books. I do not have the physical book for the second book that I'm recommending for high fantasy, but I do have two books to recommend for that. So I believe I have, anyway, one moment actually while I edit my description real quick. I have it all fixed now, and to now give the book recommendations. First and foremost, the one I kind of showed earlier, the Saviors Book Cafe Story in Another World, the story based on the novels by Kyoika Izumi. And this one, like, I've only read the first volume, so I'll probably try to continue with the manga to see if I like it or continue liking the story or not. This one was really cute. I really liked this first volume. And this one, it kind of would fall under cozy fantasy and like middle fantasy. It's not like low fantasy, it's not high fantasy, it's like cozy middle fantasy. Really cute, really sweet. In this, you're following Sukina, who is a single 30-something office worker whose favorite thing is curling up with a good book. When a god tells her that she must go to another When a god tells her that she must go to another world to become its magical savior, Sukina isn't interested. She has zero desire to go on some grand hero's journey. So when she arrives in this strange new land, she decides to use her magical powers to create a cozy little book cafe instead. Her first customer is a handsome soldier who loves reading almost as much as she does. But when a fellow savior starts causing trouble, Sukina might have to play hero after all. So that's what this one is about. Again, really cute, really cozy, but I haven't gone beyond volume 1 yet because I'm trying to get some other stuff, some of my other series completed and filled out first, or as completed and filled out as possible. But I do want to continue with this one, so this one seems like a good continuation, or it seems like it could be a good continuation. The next one I want to recommend for manhwa, so that was a manga recommendation. For manhwa, I was going to recommend Heaven Official's Blessing again, but then I feel like that would have been a little bit repetitive. And the main reason why my instinct was to go with that one was because I have finished it. And that is one that I would recommend from start to end. But again, I just didn't want it to be repetitive, so I decided to go instead with, by the same author, Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, or Mo Dao Zushi. And this is also by Mojang Tongju, which is why I'm a little bit more comfortable recommending this, because I trust the author enough at this point. I've read this already. I'm going to try to do what I did with Heaven Official's Blessing, where I get all, I think there are more volumes in this one, I'm not quite sure, but I get all of them, or maybe there's less. But anyway, I get all of them and I do another read through. But I absolutely love this. And then, because I'm not as familiar with the story as I am with Heaven Official's Blessing, I'm giving you the description, as I'm doing. Oh boy. Wei Wujian was one of the most outstanding men of his generation. A talented and clever young cultivator who harnessed martial arts, knowledge, and spirituality into powerful abilities. But when the horrors of war lead him to seek a new power through demonic cultivation, the world's respect for his skills turned to fear, and his eventual death was celebrated throughout the land. Years later, he awakens in the body of an aggrieved young man who sacrifices his soul so that Wei Wujian can extract revenge on his behalf. Though granted a second life, Wei Wujian is not free from his first, nor the mysteries that appear before him now. Yet this time he'll face them all with the righteous and esteemed Lan Wangji at his side, another powerful cultivator whose unwavering dedication and shared memories of their past will help shine a light on dark truths that surround them. So, I'm really excited for this. And then on the back, it says, the novel series that inspired the live-action drama The Untamed. So I might give that a try. I think there is an animated show for, here's the bookmark in here. I think there is an anime, or Donghua for this. So I'm going to probably give both of those a try if there are both. But this one, I really like this. And then the next book was for the dual timeline historical fiction, and for that one I chose, this was the one I forgot to grab. That one I chose The Paris Orphan. Also, on this channel, I do love deckled edges, so it's like, I think it's just like the feel of it, and kind of like the feel of like the pages, and the fact that, like, I feel like it's the feel of like the somewhat distinct, yet not distinct pages. But I love deckled edges. I don't have a lot of books with deckled edges, but I love a good deckled edge. But I do think it has to fit the book, because sometimes it's like you get a deckled edge and it's like, that doesn't really fit the book. So, anyway, The Paris Orphan for the dual timeline historical fiction. Like I said, I mentioned her last week. I think I talked about the Mademoiselle Alliance last week. So, in this one, I haven't read this in a while, and I don't think I can read it again, but I absolutely loved this book. And in this one, just to give you a little, okay, this is a dual timeline, so just to give you like a little snippet at the top here at the back, an American soldier and an enterprising photographer brave Occupy France in the midst of World War II to help give a little girl the one thing she's never had, a family. And then later, the second timeline is basically following the daughter of that little girl. So that's what the dual timeline is. Amazing story, amazing book. I love Natasha Lester's work. So, highly recommend. And then for the historical fantasy book, I'm going to recommend Under the Oak Tree by Suji Kim. I absolutely love this. I still need to read book 2, but I think I'm going to wait until I have book 3, and then maybe read books 1, 2, and 3 in order, just so I can have some sensation of like binging it. But I absolutely love this. And in this story, you're following Lady Maximilian Croiso, who's the daughter of the powerful Duke Croiso, but she's rarely allowed outside her family's sprawling castle for fear that her stutter will tarnish their noble name. When she is forced to marry Sir Riften, a lowborn knight caught in one of her father's schemes, Maxie doesn't dare hope for happiness, let alone love. Her stumbling communication and his gruff manner sour their relationship before it can begin, and Riften leaves without a word the morning after vows are exchanged. Now, 3 years after their disastrous wedding night, Riften has returned as a war hero. To Maxi's surprise, despite rumors that he was offered a marriage to Princess Agnes, a renowned sorceress, a beautiful and renowned sorceress, Riften still wants Maxi for his wife. And when he comes to claim her, his desire bewilders Maxi, even as she is overcome by the scorching heat that Riften's presence ignites within her. So that's what this is about, and she's basically starting to learn to navigate her new life, her life with Riften, and navigating that relationship, and navigating like speaking more with her stutter. So, absolutely beautiful story. I'm in love with it. So, yeah, I might wait until I get book 3 so I can, like I said, have some semblance of like binging it. And then the next one that I'm going to talk about is the mythological fiction recommendations, and here I have 2. The first one, like I mentioned, this one is under the Greek mythology retelling, so Greek mythological fiction umbrella, but this is from like a different point of view, so that's why I'm okay with recommending it. And it is Clytemnestra. I do not see this one talked about a whole lot, so that's why I'm like, I need to recommend it. Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati. And if you know anything about like the Iliad, so basically in the Iliad, Agamemnon, before they set out to go save Helen of Troy, Helen of Sparta, excuse me, I'm trying to be before they go out to save Helen of Sparta, Agamemnon, like, he's trying to get his fleet out, but the winds have died down because they've displayed some of the gods. And so Agamemnon ends up sacrificing one of his daughters, and Clytemnestra, his wife, is really torn up about that. So this is that story through her eyes, and leading up to that through her eyes, which, perfection. And it's a good feminine rage book. Good feminine rage, and we love the feminine rage. And then the next recommendation that I have for the mythological fiction is Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. And I absolutely love this story. It's been a little while since I read it, but, my book of the month read-through will help me reread it again. But I absolutely love this story. It's beautiful Indian mythology. Remember to stay hydrated, guys. Absolutely beautiful. So, description for this: I was born on the full moon under an auspicious constellation, the holiest of positions. Much good it did me. So begins Kaikeyi's story, the only daughter of the kingdom of Kaikeyi. She is raised on tales of the gods, how they churn the vast ocean to obtain the nectar of immortality, how they vanquish evil and ensure the land of Bharat prospers, and how they offer powerful boons to the worthy. Yet she watches as her father unceremoniously banishes her mother, listens as her own worth is reduced to the marriage alliance she can secure, and when she calls upon the gods for help, they never seem to hear. Desperate for independence, she turns to the text she once read with her mother and discovers a magic that is hers alone. With it, Kaikeyi transforms herself from an overlooked princess into a warrior, diplomat, and most favored queen. So that's what this one is about, and I think that's all you really need to know going into this. But it's an absolutely beautiful story and beautifully written, again, leaning into the feminine rage a little bit here. So we love that. And then last but not least is the high fantasy. I feel like I'm gonna this is one. The only reason why I'm recommending it is because I feel like it's talked about in certain niches. It's not necessarily talked about as much on BookTok. I feel like it's starting to get talked about more on BookTok and on bookish social media spaces, but it's more so if you're in the book space and in Lord of the Rings space. It's if you're in the book space and in Middle Earth, Lord of the Rings space on social media, then you are more likely to talk about it. But if you're not necessarily in the Lord of the Rings space or haven't read it, you're I've seen people talk about Brandon Sanderson and George R.R. Martin and Paul Rothfuss more, which it's not a big deal. And I do see a lot of people talking about J.R.R. Tolkien, but I honestly I think it's because, like I said, it's because you have to be in both spaces to see it being talked about on BookTok. So I would want to have I don't want separation, but it's like I want it talked about a little bit more independently on BookTok. So Lord of the Rings, I am showing, this is a little bit beat up because I took it with me to Washington DC when I was there 4 years ago now. So, and this you're following Frodo Baggins, who basically embarked on this quest to destroy the One Ring of Sauron. That's all I'm going to tell you. That's all you really need to know. I'm putting this back in its spot because I don't want to have to worry about putting it back later. So, the last book that I'm going to recommend, again, I do not have a physical copy, but it is A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. This could also be under the mythological fiction genre. Excuse me. But this works really well under high fantasy as well. And in it, you're following Taran, who had gone to the mainland. He had left Cadence when he was young, going to the mainland to learn magic, and then he's called back to supposedly help with the case of the missing girls who have started to go missing on Cadence. So that's all you need to know. It's a duology, and it's absolutely beautiful and beautifully told, beautifully written. And it also could fit under romantasy as well. So if you're a romantasy person, A River Enchanted is perfect. So that is it for this video and for these recommendations. As for the question, it's going to be like the past 2 weeks. What is like a book style and or genre that you feel like BookTok and or book or social media do not talk about as much? Let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in my next video.